Mark, I'd like to go into the infinity of thoughts. Would you like to join me?
Sweet, let's do that. Are we talking about Emperor in the Nightside Eclipse on the Requiem Metal Podcast with Mark Rudolph and Jason Hundy?
We are. And
awesome.
Actually, I'm Jason.
And I'm Mark.
Oh my gosh. It's nice to meet you here.
Yeah.
In the infinity of thoughts.
I'm also a Black Wizards.
Ah, yes. And if you haven't been to the, or gotten the keys, the cosmic keys to the creation and times,
Well, once you get the keys, you get to go to beyond the great vast forest. So,
in a Satana.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's too tempting. Too tempting to go.
See if you can talk in Emperor song titles all day.
Yeah.
And annoy your coworkers.
We're back with what feels like yet another deja vu moment that I'm having in my life, which is our second time recording Emperors in the Nightside Eclipse Hall of Fame episode, just like the second time we recorded Disrupt, Unrest, and various other activities.
Yeah, I think we pretty much hit all of our initial points that we did last time.
Yeah.
So
we just probably more streamlined, more efficient.
And actually, I think we did them in opposite order.
Did we?
I think we start.
No, we ended with this both times.
Okay,
so we always end with a loopy black metal atmospheric crazy record. So, but Into the Infinity Thoughts, which you just heard, opens the very notorious and rightfully so In the Nightside Eclipse. Probably
out of the second wave of black metal, it's probably like number 2 or 3 on my list.
Yeah, it's up there for me. I mean, I've always been probably more in the. I mean, not that you're not a huge Emperor fan, but I've probably been. Whereas you've probably maybe carried the flag more for like Immortal or Satyricon. I've maybe carried the flag a little bit more.
I carry the flag for Dark Throne. I carry the black flag for Dark Throne.
There you go. Sorry, that was I was like a lob, and you just hit that right out. My bad. But yeah. So Emperor might be. This might be number 2, number 1 for me. It just depends. If we're talking like kind of classic, important second wave records like Enslaved Frost, this.
Yeah, personally, I don't know about if it's necessarily importance, but number 1 is Blazing the Northern Sky, for sure. 2 is probably Pure Holocaust, and 3 is Nightside Eclipse.
And see, for me, and this is the odd part, and I think I've told you this before, in fact, maybe on recording before.
It could have been.
This was the first black metal record that I ever heard. And
in its entirety, or was it
in its entirety? And because what happened is, I've told this story before, obviously, many times about going into New Moon and meeting Chris and ordering Tiamat, Wild Honey, and then Tales from Thousand Lakes, Amorphous, and then kind of oh man, somebody else in town that listens to this kind of stuff, and Chris really kind of dug showing people new stuff, and so I remember going over to his apartment.
He was an enabler.
Yeah, he was. He was good. he was a good drug dealer, peddler of metal, and I got into a conversation where I remember I had started reading in Metal Maniacs or whatever I had my hands on at that point about what this whole black metal thing, and I remember I kind of asking him like what the difference between black metal and death metal was, because at this point I was so
one word, Satan,
green around the edges. Well, he actually gave it to me pretty well. He talked about the drumming style difference and the high vocal pitch stuff that you hear,
production differences and stuff.
Yeah, some of the riffing, versus sort of the more down tune kind of stuff that death metal did. But he gave me this record to borrow to record, and this was the first black metal record like I heard, and I had it on cassette tape, and so I'd listen to it. I was mowing lawns and doing stuff like that.
Actually, it probably goes pretty good with the whir of a lawnmower.
We've been having some stereo issues at my house, and it puts like this high gain on all the
it's like extra cult, yeah.
And so we were listening to this record, which is supposed to be kind of more of a beautiful atmospheric record, and it had extra cult button,
yeah, basically
put on. Kind of fun.
It sounded like the recorded, the dubbed cassette tape version you've listened to in your car 40 times.
I think we could sell that thing on eBay and make some serious cash, some serious street cred. This is the original recording of Emperors in the Nightside Eclipse, where they polished it. But this record, so I have fond memories of it, and songs like I Am the Black Wizards and In a Satana, which I'm sure almost every kind of metalhead of the last 10-15 years is pretty familiar with. those songs still hold a pretty special spot in me because that was sort of like me almost becoming aware of an entire genre of music that hadn't existed.
Yeah.
And see, I hadn't heard of Blaze in the Northern Sky until a couple of years after that.
Okay.
So those records don't mean as much. I mean, I still love those records, but they don't have the emotional connection for me that, whereas like you,
well,
Chris,
when we first heard, because we'd heard Soulside Journey. We're like, this is pretty cool stuff, and then we heard Blaze in the Northern Sky, and we're like, that was like when I first heard Bolt for World Leader, and I was like,
it changed.
Wow, what is this? Yeah, Realm of Chaos.
Yeah. So I that's probably why I'd have to put this record as number one for me in terms of that kind of impact. It might not even be my favorite. Well,
I think it's my favorite Emperor record.
It is.
Anthems is great, but this has the rawness that I really am attracted to in black metal.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I think I probably pulled maybe Anthems out more just because this record is almost like a permanent like stamped memory for me. Mm-hmm. I don't need to listen to like I Am the Black Wizards because I can like play it in my head almost. Whereas like I might want to hear a specific song, and so I'll pull like one of the newer Emperors out just to hear like a specific song,
mm-hmm.
Like Lost and Curse of Reverence or something like that. But yeah, it's it's definitely, it holds up on all kind of fashions. And
actually, I need to move this to number 4.
Oh, okay.
De Mysterious.
Yeah. I know we had that debate lately where
I would probably probably De Mysterious is probably number 1.
Yeah,
I think now.
Now that I got my record player working, I got
you gotta pull out that 180 gram, man,
on vinyl. Yeah, and then get back into it. I think I was,
and actually Burzum lately too, even though I don't.
Oh, Philosophime, I've been putting on a lot lately.
Yeah, I don't agree with the guy's politics or whatever they've been misconstrued as, but he's put out some pretty interesting music.
Yeah. So I'm not gonna move my rankings right now. Things come in phases. I kind of go in and out of like wanting to hear stuff that's like more, I guess, bombastic, like Emperor, or more grim, or stripped down kind of stuff. And this definitely toes the line between the two, and that's, I think, what makes it kind of a magical record.
What's the first use of a lot of keyboards that I got into, and I could it was such a cohesive usage of keyboards where it's not. I think if they would have had their druthers and would have had it produced exactly how they wanted, the keyboards probably would have been higher in the mix. And I kind of like that they're kind of buried in a little bit of like distortion and
kind
stuff,
of muddy
too.
In some ways, but they're there,
But I think they're used more elegantly than, say, on the first Satyricon record, or even like
they're kind of awkwardly there, or just kind of like almost separate from the music, not blended in as well.
And they're not, obviously whoever's playing them is not very apt.
Yeah. And there's only a few people that really use keyboards very well in black metal. Sferd from Arcturus, and I think Sferd did the keyboards for the Viking Ligger from Enslaved.
Yeah, he did.
So he's probably tops for me in terms of like my favorite black metal keyboardist, but certainly.
Well, Enslaved was almost a little bit more avant-garde-ish.
Yeah,
it wasn't as like classical as Emperor was with the approach.
Yep. But for sure, this record's considered to be, I guess, the birth of symphonic black metal in a way.
Mm-hmm.
At least the first band that I think went in with the idea of creating symphonic black metal, not just like happy accident kind of. You hear some of the early Thorns stuff that we did on that Thorns episode, and he was kind of experimenting with it, but I don't think his intention was like, I want to make a symphonic black metal sound or something.
Yeah,
it was like, this would be a neat little effect to put in or something. But and Into the Infinity of Thoughts, you can hear all the things that make this record what it is. The epic atmosphere, the kind of famous Isan screams, which they're high register, but they're not as like shrilly as like, say, what Burzum or Dead were doing or anything.
God,
they're just sort of like
like listen to like Chainsaw Guts Fuck and how like over the top the vocals are on it.
Yeah, this stuff is pretty, and even like the way that Burzum sang was. It was unique, but it would
peel the paint.
Yeah,
I think that back in the day it was like too much for me to really like get into.
And now it's kind of like, I don't know, I've warmed up to that stuff because it doesn't threaten me in the same way it did when I was like 16 or 17, where I had like,
it doesn't like really confront you as much as it did back then.
Because I kind of know who I am, and I'm not going to listen to some ass clown like Burzum and be like, I'm going to change my politics and join the neo-Nazis and whatever else. But the record was recorded in 93, and it was delayed until, it wasn't released until 2 years later. And the thing, and there's reasons for that, obviously, namely, the members of Emperor, we should say, Isan, who is the lead guitar player, and he's doing the keyboards and vocals.
Okay, what's his real name?
Oh my gosh, I've interviewed the guy twice, and I can't remember. Is it like...
I don't even know. Doesn't matter.
Thomas? We'll go with Thomas. No, I'm just kidding.
It's like Ted, like Nocturne Occult, though.
Then you got Samuth on guitar, Short on bass, but... Short joined right before they went into the studio to record this, correct? Because Mortiz had just quit or had been fired.
Actually, I think Isan did all the bass on the record.
Does he?
I think he joined after the fact.
Okay. So it's one of those kind of deals.
Yeah. And then we got Faust.
And we got good old Faust, yeah. And
who's kind of I don't know if he's really undervalued or he's not really touted as being a great drummer. But as far as black metal went at this time, that kind of speed, he was pretty much tops.
Him and Trim from Enslaved were both
Hellhammer.
But yeah, well, I mean, that goes without saying. But I'm thinking of like young, like unappreciated drummers.
Fenrez he's more of a personality and I guess he has the vision of the band. He's not. I wouldn't say he's a great drummer, but he plays with feeling and he gets what he needs to.
I was going to say he's perfect for what Dark Throne wants. But the reason the album was delayed was obviously Faust was in prison, and
as was Samoth for a while.
Samoth, so in a weird way, I don't know. What's your thoughts? Do you think that the delay helped them in a way? That it kind of like built up almost like this. Like people were waiting for almost 2 years for this record that they knew was sort of floating around out there.
Yeah, we had that Wrath of the Tyrant 7-inch, I think it was. Was that what it was? It the 7-inch?
Well, you had Hordanisland, obviously the 4 songs from Hordanisland, and then.
But I think after that a 7-inch came out as well.
There? Okay.
That had what was that called now?
Well, I know the originals for Cosmic Keys and I Am the Black Wizard were on the Hordanisland, but they're a little more lo-fi.
Yeah, and I almost want to think there's. Yeah, if I find, I'll put it in the show notes if I can think of it. I'm almost positive there's another 7-inch that came out between that and the recording of this.
It kind of whetted the appetite a little bit.
That got everybody super stoked.
Yeah, and I think I can't really think of a lot of big black metal records that were put out in '95. You almost think of like 91 through like 94 as kind of like that huge stage, and by like 95, Burzum was in prison. Euronymous was dead. It was like
Transylvanian Hunger was out at this point.
Was that 94 though? I think it was.
That was in 94. Yeah.
Yeah, and
so it has already come out.
And I was gonna say I can't. And so like to me, if this record is put out in like late 93, early 94, it probably gets like lost in a glut of black metal records that were starting to come out that time. Whereas like coming out in 95, it's sort of fresh. It's been building this momentum. The expectations are kind of waiting for it.
It's got the controversy, as the Brits call it, behind it.
Yeah,
so,
the controversy. Dedicate it to Euronymous,
Yeah.
But I don't know. I don't know if that had something to do with it. You were there when this record was coming out, whereas like I was kind of a latecomer to this whole thing, so I don't really know what the exact impact when this came out was, But
from what I can remember, I think it was large, but it wasn't. I think if it would have came out a couple years ago or a couple years previously, probably would have been buried.
Yeah, and
so it's probably a good thing that the Faust killed the dude and Samoth was implicated in something else.
Yeah, it's just kind of a odd statement to make, but on some level for Emperor as a career move, it kind of worked, I guess. But the things that you'll hear throughout. Well,
De Mysterious did that come out in
94, 95? It was finally released, I think. Obviously posthumous.
Postmortem.
Postmortem. I just think of Tom Araya on Decade of Aggression. Anyways.
You see a guy fall down, help him up, all right?
That's what we're here to do. Help each other out. There's a little song called Wah! Sorry. So I lost my train of thought completely.
Yeah, I could do a whole interpretive reading.
Maybe that's how we approach the Slayer show. We've been flirting with that one for a while. How do we
I said, fuck the pen!
Mightier than sword.
That's right.
It's funny. I was just telling my students last week where that saying comes from.
It's just tell them from Slayer?
No, I should have. It's the Ottoman Empire. They had 4 social classes, and it was Men of the Pen were first, then Men of the Sword were second. That's where the pen is mightier than the sword.
So it wasn't literally... Okay.
So kind of cool, but or kind of
I'll just say it's Slayer.
Depending on how you want to learn that one. But anyways, let's we'll get into some music here, and then we'll talk more about the record. Obviously, we got a trio of tunes here. We're going to kind of play them in order as they would appear. Burning Shadows of Silence, Cosmic Keys of My Creation and Times, and then we're going to close things out with Beyond the Great Vast Forest. And I guess we'll talk more about the songs when we come back, but all I can say about the first tune you'll hear here, it's got a very much a kind of a Lord of the Rings eeriness, and we'll talk about the cover and some of the stuff when we come back. But definitely it kind of invokes the evil power of nature, which is, I guess, a common theme for this whole record, and kind of a common theme for a lot of black metal, but this, because of the atmospherics, kind of pulls some of that in a little bit too. But anyways, enjoy Burning Shadows of Silence. Beyond the great vast forest, cosmic keys to my creation and times, and the burning shadows of silence. Nice little trio of tunes there. You have any particular favorites out of those? I mean, I know Cosmic Keys.
Cosmic Keys is kind of the biggie, I think, there.
It's kind of that kind of classic opening riff, kind of a Bathory riff with like kind of an ascending keyboard that just...
Yeah.
It's a very cool... every time I hear it, it takes me to like a very different place, Well,
and there's, if you read in Precious Metal, I think that's...
Yeah, Precious Metals.
Well, there's the Nightside Eclipse right up in there as well, but there's also the Transylvanian Hunger one, and Fenriz actually breaks down the different styles of riffing, which I thought was really interesting, of the Norwegian school, where the way he was playing was single string stuff on Transylvanian Hunger, but the way like Bathory and Emperor and Immortal were playing, and Mayhem were playing like chords really fast, everything opened.
Oh, okay.
And I think that's kind of that Bathory sound. It was all chords played opened really fast.
Yeah, and in a weird way, I think they are probably the truest. I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't say the truest, but they definitely are so connected to Bathory, especially the later era Bathory. Mm-hmm. Whereas maybe Darkthrone, their roots lie with those first couple Bathory records more, than say I mean, not so much like Bloodfire Death. Bloodfire Death is like Emperor, to a nutshell because of the keyboards and the
and then Twilight of the Gods, even like
Hammerheart and some of that kind of stuff.
They almost Emperor actually follows almost the same trajectory as Bathory did in their career, really.
Yeah, in a way. They start off really kind of, well, not totally raw, but definitely with a rawness to them, and then pretty refined pretty quickly,
Well, yeah, and that also in that last talk set we were talking about, that 7-inch was As the Shadows Rise, 1994 on Nocturnal Art Productions,
which is that's Samuel's label, right? Nocturnal Arts,
and had Ancient Queen, and what was the other track?
There was a couple on there, and
there might be
can't
3.
Remember. There was
Ancient Queen
songs,
is pretty
like
rocking.
Witch's Sabbath, Ancient Queen, and
it's all on the Wrath of the Tyrant CD that came out as well.
But that kind of whet the appetite for a lot of people, I think, But yeah, definitely, Cosmic Keys to My Creation and Times, which, that and Nine Black Wizards I had mentioned before had already been, produced on the Hordanis Land EP with Enslaved back in 92. Definitely more lo-fi, grimmer, kind of stuff back on those versions. But again, those songs have been floating around for a while, and so they were kind of part of the metal pantheon, or the black metal pantheon, in terms of, classic tune.
Well, I think as far as the opening of I'm the Black Wizards, I think I like the one off the Hordanis Land a little bit better. A little more. Just because as the second guitar comes in, it sounds like somebody turns on an electric razor.
It's pretty grim stuff. I mean, that's the weird part about, black metal is there's times when I'm in a mood for some of the more polished stuff, like the Nine Equilibrium or Prometheus kind of stuff, and then there's other times where I want the
Nate's Madrigal.
Just
Transylvanian
bring it on, and so it's really a mood setting sort of thing, and I know you tend to like side more on the unpolished stuff because it has a more organic nature to it, and as I get older, I think I listen to more of that kind of stuff than I do maybe the more
the polished stuff. As far as the polished stuff is concerned, I go Emperor's the go-to for that. I mean, I rarely pull out a Dimmu Borgir record anymore. Even going back and listening to Enthroned, I'm like, it's good, but it doesn't grab me like this stuff does.
There's 2 songs I like a lot off Enthroned, and the rest I really don't ever listen to.
This and a lot of the Dark Throne and Immortal came out really pivotal times in my life too, so I'm always more drawn to that stuff, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, I've already talked about how important this record was, for me in terms of my developments and stuff. I mentioned that Burning Shadows of Silence, which we opened that last setup with, it's kind of a Lord of the Rings kind of atmosphere and kind of nature and all these sort of things.
Pre-Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings. Yeah,
exactly. These kind of storm of keyboards, very
Wagnerisms.
Wagner, yeah, exactly. The pompous, bombastic kind of thing going on, and we haven't mentioned the cover, which is pretty iconic as well. Another in the long line of Kristen Wallen
Necrolord himself
covers.
Yeah.
The purple tones, kind of different, but
and it was actually supposed to be more blue.
Yeah.
And actually the LP is more blue.
And that's more the original.
The original color scheme, I think. And I really like the cover. I think it holds up well, except the goblins.
The orcs. Yeah.
If you would close in, crop in just past the trees, So you get like the Black Rider and a little bit of the spires of that castle. I think it'd be a little classic. I mean, but I like it like I like Death Spiritual Healing's cover.
Yeah.
It's just like, I can't imagine anything different.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't want, an Immortal, just a picture of 3 dudes on the front or whatever.
Well, and this is the kind of cover that, every time I pull it out, I find something new on it.
Well, and for
like
years I
things.
never noticed the rider.
Yeah.
Because he almost blends in with the clouds.
Oh, absolutely.
And it was cool. I mean, for at least the first like 3 or 2 records and EPs, he was kind of like a fixture, and slowly kind of got out, but
faded out. But
like him, along with like the Dissection, Grim Reaper guy, it's like an Eddie, for black metal.
Yeah, I had never really even thought about that, but certainly it's on the cover of the Hordanus Land and different things as well. But the early black metal stuff, especially the stuff that tended to have more atmosphere and keyboard kind of stuff working for it, really did kind of tie in with some of the more kind of violent nature kind of themes that Tolkien explored in the novels, The Lord of the Rings. I don't know if that was explored as heavily in Peter Jackson's adaptations, but
even when you bring it up, it's kind of laughable to a lot of people to associate evil with Lord of the Rings, like in a serious tone. And granted, these were 17, 18-year-old, 20-year-old kids at the time, but still,
sure. And so I don't know. There's something encapsulated in the music that also like lends itself to that sort of violent like nature thing. And Immortal certainly tapped into that a lot with some of the lyrical content that they did. And Dark Throne a little bit, but more I always associate it mostly with like Emperor and Bathory and
Dark Throne's always thought was more of psychological lyrics than anything. Yeah. And nihilistic lyrics, and
you hear that in the songs as well. Like I said, I kind of get that kind of thing working. The last tune we just heard, though, Beyond the Great Vast Forest, I want to make mention of one thing that you and I had kind of talked about. Besides nature being like a big theme, but this is sort of a Merciful Fate riff, kind of played at the wrong speed, is what you and I kind of came up with. Very pronounced use of keyboards. This and Cosmic Keys are really amping up the use of keyboards. It's might be the most in your face that you hear the keyboards besides in a Satana, which sort of is keyboards all over the place. But Merciful Fate was another big, I think, influence especially for Emperor. I mean, they were on black metal in some ways thematically, just because of the Satanism kind of stuff.
Yeah, and even like the catchiness of stuff, some of the riffing, but they were much. I think Merciful Fate and King Diamond were much more in the heavy metal genre.
Well, and I think Isan, if you kind of follow with Emperor's career, I mean Isan, I think always wanted to be that sort of he wanted those guitar theatrics. He just
the Andy LaRocque
didn't know how to play them at this point. I mean, he's too young and he's too unpolished. And so he buries some of the guitar stuff in so much other layers and different things. But, certainly by the next record, by Anthems, you start to hear hints of his guitar virtuoso-ness. And then, obviously.
And then it becomes all pinch harmonics.
Yeah, he's a pinch harmonic master. But, so I just wanted to mention that because also vocally, obviously, King Diamond was a huge influence on all black metal, but especially Isan, and they did the great cover of Gypsy, which is a bonus track now on In the Nightside and stuff. But so it's all there. But anyways, I don't want to bemoan the point too much, but this next trio of tunes has one of my favorite transitions probably ever on a black metal CD, when you move from The Majesty of the Night Sky into I Am Black Wizards, and
with the explosion,
the cannon explosion, and plus this is probably the song Majesty of the Night Sky where you hear him doing his most like guitar line theatric kind of stuff right at the end of the song. He's trying to show off his chops, but it's kind of in a sloppy 19-year-old
I think it's endearing though that way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's very cool. But we're going to start off with Towards the Pantheon, which is, to me, like, this was the most forward-thinking of the songs on this. I feel like it might be the last song that they wrote, like, in the studio, because it sounds the most like what Anthems is going to kind of start to sound like. Yeah. It's more layered. It's more kind of got classical elements. It seems like it, when I listen to it, I get a Lost and Curse of Reverence kind of feel, or this feeling of like there's so much kind of happening that like my head's kind of in the clouds, probably like how you're feeling right now with like cold medicine. Like it's like all surrounding you, but and like you can hear all the different musical things happening, but it's hard to like individualize them because they're like flowing together so well. It's a weird feeling. Very hypnotic keyboard use. It's cool, and the keyboards are weird because they almost this is probably the most separate that they are in the whole record from the music itself, and so you get like this intensity on one side, and then you get the hypnotic keyboards kind of working on another side, and it's a neat song, and it's weird because for so many years I think I listened almost exclusively to 3 or 4 songs of this record, or if I listened to it, I certainly didn't pay attention to which song was playing when. It was just sort of there.
It's in the background.
And now when we have to sit down and like pull pieces of this record apart in order to like talk about it from a Hall of Fame perspective, I kind of discover things that I never really knew were there or what I was looking for. And this is one of those sort of those little nice surprises, as they say.
Yes.
And then of course the aforementioned Majesty of the Night Sky, which has a really pretty cool ending.
So do we know the definitive origins of the Thunder Drum?
I do not know. It could be. I wonder if it's one of those weird like studio sound effects, or if it's like one of those organic things that like
I'm not sure. I mean, because
Judas Priest used when they dropped all the silverware to make like the metal gods.
Well, it became kind of like a staple later on. I mean, Mayhem used it a lot. Immortal used it occasionally. Darkthrone used it. Satyricon used it. Yeah.
So I don't know. I
always like the Thunder Drum. Nobody ever talks about it. I want to see a sidebar column in some magazine
I've
about
heard,
that.
You know where I hear it? I've heard it in a couple of old Dokken songs. Some exploding guitars and different.
Well, not the actual explosion, but just where they. It's almost like they crank up the volume on a drum hit.
Oh, okay.
As they're playing.
Yeah.
It's like a full thunder.
Hellhammer did it on obviously Mayhem and some of the Arcturus stuff as well.
Yeah, he's probably the biggest proponent. Actually, Nick Barker in Cradle, or not in Cradle, but in Demu did it.
Yeah, he did it quite a bit. Yeah, I don't know. We'll have to explore the origin.
If any listeners out there know the origin of the Thunder Drum,
it's probably weird. It's probably something like probably Snorri did it or something like that.
I wouldn't be surprised.
He seems to have done like everything, but never really got any credit. So. But and then we have the aforementioned I Am Black Wizards, and we'll talk a little more about why that song's so gosh darn important. But enjoy Toward the Pantheon, The Majesty of the Night Sky, and I Am the Black Wizards.
Plural.
is mine. Forever may I live. So very so sweet. But I am the spirit of their existence. But I am done. I am the Black Wizards, Majesty in the Night Sky, and Toward the Pantheon.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on I Am Black Wizards? I mean,
it's one of my favorite Emperor songs.
It certainly is.
It pretty much, I don't know, it sums up everything I like about black metal in one song.
Yeah.
Like almost better than anybody else. If I need to play okay, what's black metal? I'm the Black Wizards. Yeah.
I think it is the best breakdown ever in black metal.
Yeah, it's right
best.
up there.
I mean, just because it's, I mean, Dark Throne is the best at having those sort of groove kind of Motorhead kind of breakdown type. Well,
Dark Throne, they kind of they work on monotony.
Yeah,
it's not on catchiness necessarily. Yeah. When you do get the catchiness, all right, but for the most part, it's monotony. Well, just like Burzum.
And I think what's interesting about this is it's not so much just like dropping into like a monotonous sort of groove riff or something like that, which is but it's literally like kind of a break. Like a literal breakdown, It goes from just
Anthrax would be proud.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's such a abrupt kind of shift that happens that it really catches your attention. I think it might be the best integration of keyboards on the whole record.
Yeah,
in terms of just seamless.
I think it's probably the best song they ever wrote.
Yeah, probably.
It's probably like their iconic next to In Honest Satana, which is more of an anthem. This is more of like their. It's like their signature song, I think.
It's like their Pull the Plug or Zombie Ritual or something like that. It's just like the song you have to have, or maybe even their their Raining Blood or something like that.
Yeah, when have they not played it live?
Yeah, exactly. It's certainly, to me, has all the catchy elements. Some of you can start to hear some of the technical prowess, but it's also got like the organic kind of
naivete in it as well.
It's all there. It's cool too.
It's got a great title.
Yeah, and Majesty in the Night Sky, which blew into that. That was the one that we were talking about. Has the great explosion at the end and stuff, but also some cool things.
Which Kiss kind of brought to prominence with the live records.
Yeah, there you go.
It all comes back.
So maybe it is Kiss. Maybe that's what will prompt us. The other thing that was cool in that tune is some of the drumming stuff that Faust is doing. Really like odd. Like drumming kind of time signature stuff at the end of Majesty of the Night Sky before Isan starts doing some of those like weird scales before the whole explosion happens.
Well, I don't know if this is the first record necessarily, but I think it's the first where it's really pronounced. Is doing the blast and accenting it with splash cymbals, and because you can't really do rolls at that speed, it doesn't sound right. So just doing, and actually then Trim went on to really.
Trim was like the master of it,
of the splash. I mean, he had like 40 splash cymbals on his thing just to accent everything with how fast he was going all the time.
Well, like what I used to do with Anthems, and I think the reason why Anthems is so tight with In the Nightside is Anthems to me was like almost the first album that made sense to me on headphones. Mm-hmm. Like I'd always listen to stuff on like Walkman and stuff like that, but I feel like that record didn't make any sense until you sat down, closed your eyes, and like sifted through the chaos and found all these genius moments, like all the little like cymbal work that Trim was doing on Anthems, and so there's like that.
Well, what did it for me was the video that accompanied the Lost and Cursed of
Reverence. Yeah,
when I saw Trim's like feet on the kick pedals, I was like. Wow.
Well, that's not the only thing about that video.
Well, and the shoulder pads on Isan are sweet.
well, not only with Isan is there's a part it's so buried in the mix until you actually watch him playing the guitar solo. Yeah, and he looks like Eddie Van Halen.
Well, he looks like Shane Embury playing bass.
You're
live.
Like, what the hell is he playing? And then you start to actually hear the notes. You're like, holy crap! I mean, there's some awesome stuff happening, but you can barely hear it. So. Yeah,
that could be like one of the first black metal videos. Yeah, at least the one that I watched it probably 40 times when I first.
Did that come out before Mother North? Right around the same time, wasn't it?
No, that came out in like '96, didn't it? I'm guessing. Well, at least by the time we got it.
Okay, I feel like the Satyricon video was what, '96 too, or was Nemesis?
Possibly, but it was European only, so it was like a PAL VHS. So I don't think we saw it for a little while. Actually, it made it onto one of those Nuclear Blast sampler VHS tapes, but it wasn't the one with boobs in it, so we weren't as interested.
Sadly.
Yeah.
Teenagers across America were just...
I think Lost in Curse of Reverence is a more interesting video.
Oh, it was cool. Yeah. And
it's like a cool black metal uniform.
Well, and plus it was just like As the Shadows Rise, it kind of whet the appetite for anthems because you saw the video on the Reverence EP, which came out probably 2 or 3 months before. And
it was this tiny little QuickTime window. God, that sucked.
And you used to get so excited about it, like, cool. But kind of funny. And the early tech. We were talking about the crappy early. That was on my first Mac, stuff of like Hypocrisy album covers and all the glut of late 90s, like kind of, oh my gosh, I remember like the first time we actually
Napalm Records, every cover.
Oh god. Well, you could, speaking of boobs, just the late 90s, just everything that was so new about computers was odd.
Tit City.
Yeah. Well, remember when you first like ventured into that and you're like, wait, this stuff's out,
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyways, moving on to Emperor, we've got one more for you, and this is a song I think a lot of you folks out there have probably heard at one time or another.
They usually close out most of their shows with it, don't they?
I think they do.
At least I've still never seen them out. Most of their live DVDs they do.
Yeah, I've seen them twice, but for the life of me, I wouldn't be able to tell you though.
What is it, a double live disc, the reunion thing that Candlelight put out? It's really nice. Definitely pick it up.
Better than the live record they put out back in like 2001 or 2002, which is a little muddy.
Yeah, this is produced like impeccably. It's like them at their absolute zenith.
And when I saw them both times, there was a lot of chaos happening. A lot of that stuff is only stuff you can do in a studio. Yeah.
Unless you got a great sound guy, and most of the time when they come over here, it's some dude that could give two shits about. What are these guys? Emperor? All right,
I'll give you the basic sound that I give Razor and Anvil.
Yeah,
but
File Driver. Hey, Marduk had that entire Obedience EP. Does all File Driver covers.
I can smell a whole, oddball Canadian thrash metal from the '80s show coming down the pike.
Let's do it.
Okay,
I don't have much of
Annihilator. I think Annihilator is one of they're up there.
Annihilator.
But if for those of you that have seen Metal Headbanger's Journey, this was used very prominently when Sam Nunn travels to Norway to discover black metal.
Sam Dunn, isn't it?
Nunn? Dunn? Yeah, I think it's Dunn. I don't know. I think I went to school with a guy named Sam Nunn. So, 2 N's. But anyways, In a Satana. This was my first favorite Emperor song. This was the one that like kind of grabbed me right away because of just the overwhelming saturation of keyboards that sort of happens, and it gave me.
They played at a black metal football game.
Yeah. It makes me feel. It gave me an uneasy feeling in a way.
Yeah.
Because it felt like it was like a satanic choir like singing along. It like made like
dead serious.
Evil and Satanism kind of like beautiful. Not like Deicide or Slayer where it was like.
Scare your parents and
exactly Halloweenish or something like this. This was sort of like a Black Mass or something like that, and I hadn't heard some of the old Merciful Fate and things where they're come to the Sabbath and things like that. But very over the top, some very cool eerie kind of chanting vocals and probably one of the most prominent uses of keyboards that anyone had ever heard in metal up until this point.
What a great ending to where it's just the keyboard's like holding down for 20 seconds or something.
Well, and I compare it to the end of Sgt. Pepper's when they hit 21 piano key, 21 pianos all hit the same key at the same time, and this resonance just sort of fades away.
But more evil.
Yeah, the sinister version of it. So. But it's a great way, great way to sort of end the show as well. And we didn't really give a shout out, but we should probably give a shout out to Python for his production on this record. What he was able to capture, the reverb, giving it the orchestral feel. Well, I think still very grim and organic.
Yeah, and he wasn't. I don't think he was. Well, up to this point, what did he produce?
He had done some Enslaved and some Immortal stuff.
Okay,
Greed Colin.
So, I'm kind of glad that they had the limitations of analog. Yeah. Because otherwise this thing would sound too spit and polish.
Cold, the digital coldness, and stuff that wouldn't have had that same sort of feel. But definitely a memory. It's definitely an album that, even though Emperor's not around officially as a band anymore, continues, I think, to have a pretty dramatic impact on the way that people think of black metal today.
It's most likely it's in everybody's collection.
Yeah, it should.
It's one of those 3 or 4 black metal records that really should be.
If it's not, it should be. So, but so we hope maybe this wasn't a new experience for you, but maybe you just enjoyed our thoughts and laughed along with some of our memories and stuff of a record that's probably pretty near and dear yourselves. But let us know.
I revisit it all the time.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. So let us know what your thoughts were, and maybe you have a favorite Emperor.
What's your
record?
special Emperor memory?
Yeah,
let us know.
What's your favorite? Are you a Beyond the Great Vast Forest kind of guy, or are you a I Am the Black Wizards kind of gal?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, we can market like a whole Christmas holiday like package. So, oh my gosh. Anyways, before we get in too much trouble or get too silly, I am Jason.
And I'm Mark, and go to requiempodcast.com if you'd like to help us out on the show. Leave us a donation to help us with our operating costs. Or, which is even nicer, go to iTunes and give us a great review or tell a friend about it. We'd love it.
We would love it. So enjoy in a Satana.
Hail Satan.